It invites us to constantly pursue self-effacement in others. In other words, Tulo is not just the word or concept. It is the birthplace of Pacific education. It is our first counselor to fostering collective evolution. You master the art of Tulo, you unlock access both to managing the ego and to respectful coexistence. I start with Tulo because this is the whole essence of my talk this morning. It is about humility and managing the ego. Hence my choice of the theme this morning, Tōfā Tāofiofi, the wisdom of restraint, education with a soul in the context of the whole of life philosophy. I want to share my story of how I struggled for more than 30 years with the education system and research cultures we have attuned to. And I believe that my story is no different from the many stories that are floating in this room. But before I do that, I want to acknowledge the work of many educators around the region, including those who are seated here today, and your role in national development. I want also to acknowledge the great work and the success of the National University of Samoa, a university that started with $5, which has now witnessed today the fruits of the passion and commitment of many, including the head of the university that we have today, as well as the CEO, the Vice Chancellor, and many of those. I want to acknowledge this morning the cultural protocols that were shared this morning in the Ava ceremony welcoming us. But I also want to say this morning that I always envy NUS because I see that NUS is run by women, very powerful women. And I hope that in my own university, I would like to mimic the same model that the National University is actually pursuing. I will be referring to the word list or wisdom. There's a reason why. I refer to the West as a project, a colonial project, not a country, not a region. Just like the new social stratifications of global North and global South is a project. These are all colonial framings to divide and conquer. From where I stand, I only see islands and oceans, whether it's a big island such as Australia or small as Tuvalu. Islands with no boundaries, all connected by one ocean that was later named by explorers. Second, most of the examples that I will be using this morning are drawn from my Samoan cultural context. I can only speak confidently from this Itulangi, this side of the horizon or this side of the heavens. And Itulangi is limited. It is not a whole, and it must not be the whole story. And that is the beauty. The limitedness of our knowledge and our worldview is, of course, needs to be acknowledged. But I will try my best to suggest the correspondences with other cultures in the examples this morning. This is my thesis. If we want to change, if we want a story that heals, that carries all that is us, that cares for the least amongst us, that includes others different from us, that is rooted in a foundation deeper within us, and founded in a purpose greater than us, then change the foundation of the story. Our story was birthed from what I called the whole of life. We didn't perceive life in compartments or fragments. Whole of life is a consciousness that includes every dimension of life. My body is an extension of the kunua of the land. I carry with me the land, which is why my blood is called palapala or hilhil, the same Sapa words for land and ocean. Which is why the Fijians say Vanua and Kamata, Kamata and Vanua. Or the Tongan says Ponua pe tangata, tangata pe fonua. Both me, I am in the land, and the lamb is in me. I came into this world through the world of the placenta, which is called in Samoa whanua, which is why a placenta is properly buried through rituals. The beating heart of the land with its rocks, which is why my heart is called Fachi. My skull is called Atinisami, the same word for shell in ocean, which is why a head of a person is sacred, because it is a representation of the basa, the ocean, the secret, the expanse. The tan, which is called in Samoa the laulo favor, meaning to distribute the cash, is not so much a digested system, but rather represents a distributed system. This is because our economic system was tied to the distribution of food. Once we recognize this embodied truth, we begin to learn that we are not the center of everything. Therefore, we must always welcome. Tōfā Tāofiofi. The whole of life philosophy has several principles such as integration, mutual contradiction, and restraint. I will share a little bit about these principles later. But let me start with the principle of Tōfā Tāofiofi, or restraint, in Samoa. Tōfā is wisdom, and Tāofiofi comes from the word Tāofi, meaning to stop, to restrain, to control, to contain, to limit, to wait. In Fiji, the same principle is called Vakatatambu. It is a wisdom characterized by slowing down, by pause, waiting, and silence. Tōfā Tāofiofi is an ethical system put in place by our forebears to monitor greed and the explosion of the ego. We see this in the Samoan and other Pacific languages that forbid us from self-praise and self-elevation. Restraint is not just an ethical system that manages human relationships. It is cosmic and ecological. For example, awan o deina are mythological husband and wife in Samoan mythology. Restraint defines their coexistence. When our expanse emanating daylight as we see today, Po contracts to its minimum proportion. In reverse, when Po expands, emanating nighttime, our contracts to its minimum proportion. This constant extension and contraction is non-eliminative and holistic, a cosmic system to manage control and domination. Time, for example, does not move in fragments or eras or periods. We measure time according to relationships, and we manage relationships according to time. Which is why Pasifika people are terrible with chronological taibikiti. We don't rush in order to ensure no one is left behind, and to ensure not to violate the relational makeup of whanua that has given us life. The whole of life was the soul that gave our forebears meaning and purpose. Restraint is central to the whanua consciousness. It is a regenerative system where whanua is given time to rest and recuperate. The Bible calls this system Sabbath, not referring to a day, but rather to an ecological, ethical system that disrupts our obsession to expand, to produce, and multiply, including our obsession for power that would destroy God's creation. Tōfā Tāofiofi is learning how to wait and listen to hear the heartbeat of others. And when we learn to, the brevity and the childish estiness of our creative imagination are replaced by prudent conditioning and deep ineffable care. Waiting is key to continuity and growth. We wait for people to be present before we make decisions. We wait for people to come before we go through the protocols. Especially this morning, I came late, the protocol is already on. And we came after the time. So we waited. We wait for the land and sea to recuperate before we farm and fish again. If we are into control and predictability, we won't be able to hear the land, even God, speaking to us. For several decades working as an educator, I feel that our education system and research cultures have derailed from the values of restraint. Our education has engineered a different kind of leadership that focuses on pride and the promotion of the ego, on rushy systems, structures, policies, and resources for the sake of development and endless growth. Take, for example, the idea of research. The first flaw in our research cultures today is the assumption that there is knowledge waiting for us to be researched, articulated, and owned. As a result, research has developed a new system based on the values of extraction and ownership of knowledge. In Pasifika whole of life philosophies, we don't research knowledge. We wait for knowledge. This is because knowledge is a gift, not a commodity. It is only when the communities trust us as the custodian of their knowledge that they will share the gift of knowledge with us. Take also, for example, the concept of human rights. Most often, we are obsessed with centralizing human rights in our development story that we miss what Tuiatua refers to as the ethical decency of rights, or aya tatau. Aya is rights, but tatau, meaning appropriate or suitable, promotes ethics. Aya is about privileges and entitlements. Tatau approaches the question of appropriateness and the duty of care. For example, when it comes to speaking, tatau manages what to speak, the importance of content, when to speak, the importance of time, how to speak, the importance of method and approach, where to speak, the importance of situating in place and space. Aya without tatau, or ethics, validates self-entitlement. Tatau without aya justifies social domination and legitimation of violence, especially on individuals. So both must be held together in balance. Because of the complexity and multidimensionality of Pacific cultures, human rights is not the centerpiece of the Pacific story, whether it's gender, education, or development. Life is. That is why the rights-based approach sometimes does not work in cultures that put emphasis on ethics and values, such as those in the Pacific. Today, we have derailed from educating people the importance of this balance of aya and tatau expressed through the ethics of Tōfā Tāofiofi. We need to teach our nation that limitedness is the concomitant sum of abundance. That vulnerability provides a manual for resistance. That not knowing is part of the great knowing. That silence is the birthplace of consciousness. That waiting is the first measure of wisdom. That imperfection is an extension of growth. Leaders who are educated in this wisdom of restraint and holding these contradictions, such as Aya and Tatao, together, are often looked at as custodians, stewards, and carers for others. From a personal opinion, any education that does not manage the ego, that does not set limits to our powers, privileges, and entitlements, that does not create ethical structures for self-reflection and assessment, runs the risk of creating an education without a soul. Hence, anything without a soul is there. Our problem today is that our education models are premised on narratives not of our own. We know the Western narratives better than we do our own. That is the tragic irony of development in the Pacific. As a result, grounded in Western philosophies, our education system became a victim of the compartmentalized cultures of Western societies. In the dawn of the Enlightenment, the human being was dismembered and distributed among institutions of power. Science was given the body to be researched, trained, and cured. Education was given the mind to train to educate, guide, and theorize. And religion was gifted with a soul to nurture and save. The issue is this. By the end of the 19th century, the human person was no longer an interconnected unit. The body became materialistic and consumerist without a soul. The mind became viciously theoretical and abstractive and moved from everyday life. And the soul became ferociously disconnected from social responsibility and duty of care. Hence, the beginning of what I call education without a soul. Such direction of education was reimagined during the post-World War's vision of development led by the US and Great Britain, based on an ideological assumption that other parts of the world are living in conditions approaching misery, and therefore there must be saved as their economic life is primitive and stagnant. These are the words from President Harry Truman's acceptance speech in 1949 after the World Wars. This campaign was the beginning of what Sachs and Esteva calls the era of development. But such also was a birth of the education blueprint which we uphold today, that mainly focuses on saving other countries and cultures from their undignified and fated state or underdevelopment. To quote Sachs and Esteva, on that day, referring to Truman's speech, 2 billion people became underdeveloped. In a very real sense, from that time on, they ceased being what they were in all their knowledge and diversity. They were turned into an inverted mirror of someone else's reality, a mirror that belittles them and sends them off to the end of the queue, a mirror that defines their identity in terms of homogenizing and narrow minority. We have today an education system and research culture that cluster around this presumed underdevelopment narrative, defined by the endeavor to reduce work of our cultures and spiritualities in order to catch up to other development countries. So these are the questions that I want to raise for our conversation. Whose development are we teaching and researching? Who told us that we are underdeveloped? Have we ever wondered why we are behind in SDG implementation statistics? Have we considered the fact that we have been mismeasured by foreign indicators of growth that sideline our ethics and spiritualities? Are we aware of the inherent racism and coloniality in our education systems? Have we accepted the fact that most of the knowledge and research produced by educational institutions are for the market agenda and less for our communities? Let me highlight several ideas and practices in our education system that are immensely shaped by Western philosophies. In Pacific education, we promote what we call a via negativa approach, a methodology central to Western scientific knowledge and philosophy. That is, in order to arrive at truth, we must negate first. In our research policies, we often push our students to start with finding a gap in existing scholarship, a program, or a question that needed to be solved. We do this a lot in postgraduate studies. Our education system is obsessed with negative knowledge. We oversimplify reality and condemn everything to the point where nothing positive comes out of this world, including our cultures. Take, for example, what we now call decolonial or post-colonial studies. Many times we focus in these decolonial and post-colonial studies, we focus too much on the programs and political power and less on responsibility of power. We are too fixated on social immoralities and colonialism out there and less on personal immoralities and colonialism in us, something that Upolu Lumā Vaai failed to address. In the academia, the notion of decolonization is becoming more and more a fashionable and profitable academic exercise that has become purely theoretical and highly elitist. An important mode of learning that no longer has humility and self-assessment. Have we ever wondered why Pacific students are not good with locating research problems as the first step of learning? This is because they were taught at home to always be grateful first with what they have. Today, we have created an angry generation that may be skilled with analyzing theories, but lacks gratitude and self-reflection. I don't have to remind us where this becomes undeniably visible in today's world, especially in the current election season in Samoa. In Pasifika whole-of-life philosophies, we don't start with via negativa, but rather with via positiva. We affirm first the gift, whether it's a gift of culture, resources, ancestral knowledge and connections, or identity. It is by affirming the presence of the gift that we are gifted with the audacity to gently probe the nuances around surrounding negation. Pasifika philosophies is found in a living presence and relationships of the people, land, ocean, communities, ancestors, spirits. In the interweaving of multiple relationships, the movements of tangible and intangible bodies, the interaction of systems and flows, and the integrated practices and performances for the sake of life. We read this morning on the cultural protocols that we had this morning, the Samoan oratory or lau, or cultural speech, designed in a celebratory mode. We celebrate in the laua, we celebrate connections through the acknowledgement of the drink of the gods, the ava, that you grant this morning. We celebrate through the acknowledgement of the genealogies, historical events and histories, including embodied presence. In Samoa, embodied presence is everything. The essence of embodied presence is the presence of disembodied essence. In other words, most of our cultures focus less on that which is not there, but rather on that which is already there, which be a positive. Focusing on that which is not there endorses the needs-based approach of the donors that the so-called less developed countries have special needs beyond affordability, therefore are in desperate need of development aid. Hence is the recurrent evolution of the dependency syndrome in many Pacific countries. I will speak later the importance of shifting to the strength-based approach. By recognizing what we have within our cultures and knowledge systems as potential tools for a new development model. Western philosophies operate around the idea of competing contradiction. That truth can only be achieved through logical deduction. That is, something can only be true and logical when the other is considered and verified as false. No two realities can be true or coexist at the same time. Take, for example, the true and false tests we teachers often give to our students. These are my favorite tests when I was students. This is because I didn't have to do much thinking. You just eliminate one for the other to be true. However, what I didn't know was that such tests contributing to restricting my creative imagination. It made me settle on one thing at the expense of the other. Certainty works only in a linear progression of time. It does not function well in complexity and multiplicity. It does not allow us to think in potentials and opportunities. It is a recipe to fail. It kills growth. It removes hope. It places trust in the machinery of systems than in the murk of collective fashioning. It directs our focus to quick solutions rather than in a slow process of promising assurance. It disallows many stories, many voices, many options for multiple becoming. In a Pacific, life operates around probabilities and opportunities than uncertainties. Opportunities born in a womb of potential risks and comforts. Hence is a lack of the ability to articulate clearly to our people the importance of difference. That we are the same differently. That unity differentiates and unites us. That we know ourselves through others, according to Auntie Manuel Manulani Maya from Hawaii. This is exactly what mutual contradiction is. Today, we live in a world where our idea of inclusiveness is becoming very superficial, based on the avoidance of tensions and contradictions. We are deprived of the knowledge of negotiating difference. We see that in leadership in the Pacific today. Well, we live in an age, old age of Afatoism. Afato of Upora is part of our Sabai, those of us from Sabai, not Uporo, or Basam Sabai. This is part of our delicacies, Dafato. What the Afato cannot do is to cross another Afato's cell or compartment. As long as they stay in their own rooms or own cells, they are fine. Today, we no longer know how to mutually relate and negotiate our differences. We live in our own little cells. We become specialists or systems that we lose sight of relationships with people. We prioritize quality, budgets, cost, benefits, outcomes, and efficiency over virtues of right relationships. Once we don't recognize our difference, we start colonizing space and time. Now I saw this morning, what we call fatau. In Samoa, This is one of my favorite cultural protocols. It's the Fatau, a process where matai or chiefs negotiate among themselves, negotiating and verify their tenders by appealing to genealogies, to cultural traditions, and ancestors to select one skilled spokesperson to speak on behalf of the community. This is why the Fatau is also called the Sibaloa, the dance of the long view. It invites those involved in the Fatau to shoulder the long view expressed not through competency or the endowment to speak, but rather through the ethics of restraint, of slowing down, of giving way to the other. This is why sometimes even the most competent orator would give way to an elder chief to speak, even though he has all the right to speak. Though gradually eroding, this cultural protocol holds the significance of the knowledge of a negotiating difference in an open and truthful, yet grounded in the values of Tōfā Tāofiofi. Without Tōfā Tāofiofi, the ego could blind us to potential humiliation. Colonization comes from the root word colon, meaning to digest, to consume. It refers to one reality, digesting and consuming others in order to exist. It removes our difference. In my work, I've called and renamed colonization oneification, an analytical, ultra-reductionist approach that believes that there is only one constituent source of goodness, that is, everything, no matter the diverse they are, must dissolve into one reality to achieve such goodness. It denies people their difference and cultural integrity by maintaining legitimacy of the one story, one education system, and one frame of reference. Oneification continues as the main driver behind genocide, ecocide, modern slavery, theft, fraud, and dispossession in many countries. I am not saying here that Western philosophies of the current education system is totally irrelevant. I'm saying that these philosophies, Western philosophies, were developed to respond to the education and development needs of another context, not the Pacific. In the Pacific whole of life philosophies, we don't think through competing contradiction, but rather through neutral contradictions. It is how we coexist compassionately in the world of dualities without eliminating one that defines who we are. This is the vision from Bernard Narkopi on Papua New Guinea. Our vision, conflicting and harmonious at the same time, was not and still is not an artificially dichotomized and compartmentalized pragmatism of the secular society. Ours is a vision of totality, a vision of cosmic harmony that sees the human person in his totality with the spirit world as well as the animal and the plant world. Here is from the very own Samoan Kuyatua. Allusion and allegory are essentials to Samoan religious culture because thesis and antithesis coexist as synthesis. One thesis never eliminates another thesis. These contradictory versions of creation are not invalidated by contradiction. They are sustained by the many meanings suggested by allegory and allusion. This vision means that our full becoming occurs through embracing moments of tensions and contradictions. Difference here is not something to overcome, but to navigate. Some of my family are here and they know the story. I grew up in Savai'i in a very huge extended family of about 30 plus people who all ate from one pot. I remember there were prisoners about under probation who lived with us, strangers we didn't even know. Because of the both and way of thinking, we did not just grow up together. We grew in together. This is the very deep way of living. The more we grew in together, the more we synchronize, the more the world become interconnected to us, and the more we understood our contradictions and appreciated our differences. If we live in village communities, we would immediately notice that people operate in different philosophical frequency. Communities embrace mutual contradiction without realizing it. Hence, boundaries between worlds, such as material and spiritual, living and dying, constantly move and shift to inform one another. There is always a fluidity and negotiability, creating a world of continuity. Today, our failure to realize continuity in contradictions in areas of politics, of economy, of gender, human rights, and so on, is a main driver behind our polarized world, including the world of politics. We struggle to weave together the contradictions such as rights and responsibilities, self and communities, secular and sacred, power and accountability, printed or oral. We think in compartments. We think in departments. We think in silos. But this is what colonization does. One basic example is in relation on how we handle theory and practice in our education system. In our education system, we normalize that everything must, first of all, emanate from theory. We put essays into theories to understand them. Then we transfer these theories back into practice and we call it applied studies. Theories are then transformed to print-based theories, become the legitimate source of knowledge. Such knowledge becomes the primary source, archaic in history, baptized as absolutes and treated as universals, owned by so-called centers of excellence and policed by a few elite academics. This archived knowledge then glorifies the authors and not the communities who own the knowledge. We then develop academic policies that our pursuit of knowledge can only be meaningful and worth if it is verified by this archived knowledge. And it is only after we study such knowledge in theory that we apply it in a field, and we call it fieldwork. Today, we are so obsessed with converting theory, practice into theory, flesh into word, reality into theorization in our education system that we miss the point of community and relationships. Now, this is a story of what we now call today academic excellence. For Samoans, but also important for those who are coming this week from overseas. Have you ever wondered why Samoan ancestors created these proverbs? E momoeva manu ai sau manai atiak, meaning we slip in fortune to be awakened by misfortune. As a so mani noa mafa, meaning calmness is the split side of storm. Aone si tia se tia oere malu o le tai tai ao, meaning do not be deceived by the stillness of the morning tide. E awo mala, awo manu, meaning ill being leads to unbeing. A luta le tai sisi la afa, ai a angit fisana sisi la fala, meaning in strong tides, raise the sinatse, and in easterly winds, raise the maxe. These are sayings that capture the wisdom of mutual contradiction, that provides guides to negotiability and resilience. They simply remind us that life is made up of moments of dualities and contradictions. Conflict, fortune and misfortune, ill-being and well-being are part of each other. One cannot be understood without the other. We no longer teach our students with this holistic method. Second, we have succumbed to the idea that the more competitive we are, the better we climb the ladder of success. Our education system is built on this idea of competition. Our democratic values system is also built on this philosophy. As a result, we have been promoting an education system where values are measured by material wealth, by power, by entitlements, by jobs, and academic qualification. It is a system that produces and glorifies heroes, the strong and the knowledgeable, at the expense of the poor and those who drop out from school. Have we ever wondered why every year the passing and completion rate throughout the Pacific continue descending? I don't have to remind us of the statistics. Our development indicators abroad are built on this reward system, this competition system. It is a system that easily feeds the ego with less ethical and managing mechanisms. So, now I want to take you to conclude. I want to take you through to some practical strategies that I am doing in my own university, just a couple of them to cut the time, on how we build this all-of-life philosophy into the development system, whether it's gender, security, leadership, or whatever, to articulate that. The reimagining of our education system grounded in our whole-of-life philosophies, values, and spirituality is a critical task. Beyond teaching the future generation about this educational as vision, we also need to be strategic on how to incorporate our holistic values and philosophies and spiritualities into our development frameworks. Remember, I'm saying that the story cannot be complete without our values and spiritualities. For example, yesterday I was invited to open the conversation at the regional International Labour Organization conference on the theme Peace and Work, Climate Change and Security in Suva to commemorate its 50th years since working in the Pacific. The request is to find how our holistic approaches, our whole-of-life values and philosophies could be incorporated into the ILO strategies and structures within the region. And I'm happy to say that just in the evening yesterday, I was informed that the communique has already been developed by ministers of employment who are already there and representatives of some countries, where now the whole-of-life philosophy is the foundational philosophy for employment and labor strategies in the region. Second, I worked at the Pasifika Communities University in Fiji, formerly known as the Pasifika College, a regional university with a focus on whole-of-life education. We have created an educational vision that summons a return to a community-based model of learning, one that is grounded in our whole-of-life philosophies, ethics, and values, but also in the life of the communities who own the knowledge and who have been the custodians of such knowledge for centuries. We run trainees annually on the role of Pasifika whole-of-life philosophies in underpinning and transforming development policies and strategies in the region. This is attended mostly by policymakers, by university professors, and PhD students. We are currently having conversation with other regional offices, such as the UNDP, the Pacific Forum Secretary, the World Bank, and the DFAT, of trainings on incorporating Pacific philosophies and values to underpin their organizational strategies and cultures, including policies. The whole idea is not to eliminate the current education system, or to improve it and complete it. I'm 33, and I'm really grateful to the the head of the National University of Samoa, as well as departments here, that they have been sending faculty and lectures for Apia. Betray in that of training and Samoan. This year we had 3 of them, and past years as well we had a few of them. This is year as well that we had the training mostly on policymakers and educators, as well as PhD students. Now, I want to leave you with this quote. It's a 40-year-old quote, wisdom from one of the fathers of decolonization in the Pacific region on Papua Guinea, Bernard Nalpobri. This is what he said. Now that we are finally connected with the world, we suddenly see ourselves through the world mirror. Will we see our true size images, or will we see ourselves in the images and the shadows of others? Will we see ourselves in the long shadows of the dwindling light and the advanced darkness of the evening dusk? Or will we see ourselves in the long and radiant rays of the rising sun? You can choose if we will. I want to end with this, a poem that I wrote some time ago. Says for empower us this week of what I mean by neutral benediction, or I mean by when we know the spots that we don't have the ocean, we are the ocean. That we don't have the land, we are the land. That we don't have relationship, we are relationship. Once we know this matters, we become respectful of it, we honor it, and we deliver it to our people. Of time na available.